All right, so we started this passage last week. And if you were not here last week, you're out of luck. But this is Matthew 24. It's a teaching that Jesus delivered to his followers while he was on the Mount of Olives. And so we call it the Olivet Discourse. And the subject of this little chat is the end of human history as we know it. I didn't do that. All right. And the part that we have been talking about is concerned with when these things will be. So, again, I'm not doing that. But we'll start there again, and we'll work our way through some more of this prophetic stuff. And so this is a slide that we had up last week. There are actually kind of a lot of details in this little wrap that Jesus is dropping in this spot. And it's not exactly easy to organize it all and to try and make sense of it. But we tried to set this discussion up last week when we argued that there's a specific scenario or there's a collection of certain things that need to be present in order for the description of the end times to fit properly. And one of those conditions was that Israel has to be back in their country after having disappeared as a nation for 2,000 years. And so in every account of the end times, the Jews are right there in their nation, and they have Jerusalem. All right, so that's the condition that we focused on last week. The second condition is that there has to be a complete globalization. All right, the people around the world need to view the world as their world instead of like getting their identity from their nation. So nations are going to become largely irrelevant. There are also some specific bits of technology that are mentioned in descriptions of the end times that did not exist when these descriptions were written. And the whole description doesn't make any sense unless we have these technologies. Collection of stressing factors that push people of the world to believe that they need to start to do things differently than they've been doing them. And so that's part of the reason why they would accept some of these bizarre things that happen near the end. So there's also a description of some sociological changes that will come near the end of the history and some key theological conditions as well. So, like I said, we went through this one. All right. And, you know, like, I don't know, listen to the audio or something if you weren't here. But what we saw is that this particular sign is at hand. Okay. Nobody saw this coming. This didn't seem at all likely. An ancient nation disappears for a couple thousand years and then would reappear. Kinda has just always sounded like fantasy until it actually happened. There are actually Christian biblical commentators as recently, some more recently, but the big ones are, you know, as recently as 150 years ago, that were literally scoffing at this concept and explaining it away as sort of metaphorical. All right. And so, but there it is. Okay. God said it would happen. We went through a bunch of passages last week where God said it was going to happen, and it happened. Okay. So this week we're going to bore into the next one on this list. And so we're also going to touch on a few of the others, but we're going to start with globalization. So this comes up in Matthew 24 in connection with verse 15 and the verses that come after it. And so understanding this section of the discourse can be a little bit complicated, but we're going to give it a shot. Jesus says, "So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand." So this abomination that causes desolation is from the book of Daniel. All right. And so he's referring to Daniel 9:27, where it says that a prince will come and make a covenant with the many, probably referring to the Jews, for 1/7. That's 7 years. And in the middle of the 7, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction. one that is decreed is poured out onto the one who makes desolate. So this is the passage that Jesus is referring to when he brings up the abomination that causes desolation. And so, right, you see it right there. Abomination makes complete desolation. Okay, spoken of by Daniel the prophet. So this is talking about a very particular sin that's about defiling the temple of God. And that's why Jesus says, when you see standing in the holy place, right, the abomination that causes desolate. The holy place is a reference to the temple in Israel. And so one interesting thing that this statement implies is that the temple that used to be in Israel, the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, is going to be rebuilt. So I don't know how that happens when there's a giant mosque sitting in the spot where the temple is supposed to be. I have no idea, really. Okay, so maybe the mosque is coming down. Maybe they'll build the temple in a different place. Doesn't really matter. Okay, this says that there's going to be a temple. And so I would count on it if I were you. But this guy, this prince that's coming, that's mentioned here in Daniel, is the same guy that Paul calls the man of lawlessness, and that Revelations calls the beast and the Antichrist. So this is the guy that comes up repeatedly in the discussions of the last days. And so also notice this expression here where it says in the middle of the seven. So that's half of 7 years, 2 segments of 3.5 years each. And so that's going to become important in identifying this guy and identifying this abomination of desolation. So we're going to compare that passage to what it says about the same guy in Revelations 13. So this morning is not really a class on eschatology. Okay, so we're going to sort of skip across the surface of things a little bit. I'll try and tie them together for you so that it makes sense. But if you really want to get dirty digging into this stuff, I can help you find a good class or a good book or something like that. But this morning is not going to be it. All right. So anyway, this passage says that then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea. I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. All right. So I'm not going to back this up right now because we don't have time. This morning's long anyway, I think. I'm just going to tell you that if you tear this passage apart and the one in 17, then you'll see that I think that this fatal head wound that's healed is probably not a literal head wound. It's probably referring to something like what happened to Israel, where their nation disappeared for a long time and then reappeared. Something similar to that looks like it's going to happen to the Roman Empire. All right. So it will reappear after having been gone for a long time. All right. So, and we read here that the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. So the whole earth is pretty explicit on this point. So verse 7 says that he was given authority over every nation, tongue, tribe, and people. All right. That's 4 different ways of saying everybody. Okay. Everybody follows this guy. They worshiped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast and who is able to wage war with him? So where it says worship here may not refer to actual religious worshiping. Okay. The word means to bow down before. And so it may just mean that they submit themselves to his authority or his leadership. And so I don't know, maybe they do worship him, but the word doesn't say that they have to. Okay. There was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. 42 months, huh? 3 times 12, 36 plus 6. Sounds like 3.5 years, doesn't it? All right. So this last 7-year period looks like the beast leads the entire world for the first half of it. Okay. And then there's this thing that we're calling the abomination of desolation. And then in the last 3.5 years, the unity that the world has been, decided to jump into falls apart. and war breaks out, and it turns into the campaign of Armageddon. All right, so that's why Jesus says that when you see the abomination of desolation, run. Okay, get out of Dodge as fast as you can. Chapter 17 is also discussing the beast, and it says that peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues follow. Then verse 17 of that same chapter says, for God has put it in their hearts to execute his purpose by having a common purpose and by giving their kingdoms to the beast. So this is a pretty bizarre prediction, actually. Everyone in the world is going to forget about their own nation and turn it all over to this single world entity that's led by this, you can assume, charismatic beast guy. Okay. And he's not exactly a good guy. He seems like it sometimes. He also forced everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. So there's a mark on the hand or on the forehead. And you can't buy or sell anything without the mark. And so again, this is a boggling, like unbelievably remarkable prediction. All right. So this is a strange thing for someone in ancient times to write down. So if you consider that this passage is written at about 90 AD, it's like 2,000 years ago, you have to imagine ancient people reading this and being just like, what did that just say? Okay. How can any empire keep me from buying or selling anything? Right? Like how does that work? Because they're not everywhere. The Romans were pretty high control for ancient empires, but they could come nowhere near controlling what some guy in a village did with his neighbor. You see what I mean? Like there's no way that you could keep me from buying a television from my neighbor. Okay. Even today, that would be really hard. Okay. There's no way that any government has ever been able to do this. And yet this is pretty clear. All right. If you don't have this mark, you can't buy or sell at all in this last period of human history. So this is what Jesus is referring to. All right. This is back in Matthew 24. Jesus says, let the reader understand. He's expecting the future reader to be able to understand what these allusions to this beast are. And so this is not so much for the hearer. Okay. Let the hearer understand. That's not what he said. Okay. The people hearing this understood none of it. The reader later gets to understand. It's the reader who has the ability to put this together. Then he says that when you see all of that, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. And let no one on the roof of his house go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get his cloak. So forget your cloak. Don't get your books or whatever out of the house. Just get out of there. Run. All right. And then it says how dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. So that's going to be a good time to be worried about your kids or your infirm. And pray that your flight will not take place in winter, excuse me, in winter or on the Sabbath, because you're definitely breaking the Sabbath. Okay. If it happens on that day. For then there will be a great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. Those days had not been cut short. No one would survive, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. So we have this event that we've called the abomination of desolation. It's linked with this thing that we call the Great Tribulation. And so the Great Tribulation is the last 3.5 years of human history as we know it. And so we're going to learn some things about that period. And the worst thing about it is this war that's going on. And so Jesus says that this war is so bad that if the days hadn't been cut short, no one would have survived. So this is a war that is so vicious that it's headed towards killing everyone on earth. And so imagine how in the year 90 AD, you would go about killing everyone on earth. And then imagine how you would do it today. Okay, not the same thing. So this beast guy is the guy that unifies the whole world. All right, Revelation says that the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. And so try to imagine for a second that you didn't go to an American public school, okay, and that you have some sense of history. All right. So how is this even possible? Right? The nations and the tribes of the world have continually warred with one another, all right, for all of time. Efforts to unify even small segments of the globe have never succeeded for very long. Okay, humans are inherently divided people. So we've had a few like world empires and rulers who have tried or dreamed of taking over the world, but like truthfully, they've never really even gotten close. And it says here that this guy's going to succeed where everyone else has failed. And it also says that he's not exactly a conqueror. Okay, the world is going to willingly subjugate themselves to him. And so this is like pretty far-fetched stuff, I think, right? The whole world is going to get together. Is that even imaginable? Okay, is this possible? And so for the first time in human history, I believe that the answer to that question is yes, it is possible. Okay, and I'm going to talk this morning about how this thing that was so unimaginable a very short time ago is not only plausible today, but that the pieces are in place and that we're moving in that direction. And so in our day today, the case for a one world mentality is growing. Okay, and it's going to reach a point where the logic of a one world government will become irresistible. And there are some reasons that we're going to go over this morning for why that's the case. The first reason is that there will be a need for a single world government. And so according to the New Testament, as we reach the end of human history, the world's going to have a lot of serious problems. And one of them is overpopulation. All right. And so the book of Revelation has got a hint at this in chapter 9. It's talking about this big war that's going on. And it says that those beyond the river Euphrates were released so that they might kill a third of mankind. And the number of the armies of the horsemen was 200 million. I heard the number of them. Okay, so I heard that number. And that means that he's not emphasizing, he's not making it up. It's not a typo, right? He's not exaggerating. It means that he heard in the vision that there are 200 million people fighting. Okay. And this may not mean just from one side of the war. This could mean from all sides put together, but still, this number is insane. So consider for a second that in World War II, which is easily the largest conflict that we've ever seen, okay, in the world, if you combine all of the combatants on all sides over the entire time of the war, you get about 50 million. Okay. So this is 4 times that number in the field at once. So this is an astonishing number. I don't know how an ancient person even fathomed this number of people all in one place or all in one battle. Also consider this, that soldiers need transport, right? They need support. They need food. They need, like, a nation has to have 15 or 20 people at home for every soldier that they put in the field. So materials need to be produced and delivered to supply an army. That's how it works. And so this number of soldiers implies that there's a population in the multiple billions on the earth at the time that this event happens. Okay, so I've put graphs like this up before, but it's been a while. And so you may not realize just how stable the population of the earth has been throughout history. And so if you go back, 10,000 years, like before recorded human history, and like check the population, all right, there's almost always approximately the same number of people on the planet. Okay, the population grows. I'm not saying the population doesn't grow. Of course, the population grows, but it's not dramatic. Okay, the planet didn't reach 1 billion people from the time of, like, whenever humanity began until, when did it reach 1 billion people? It was in 1830. Okay, so that's a long time. However long the earth has been around, 1830 is when we reached 1 billion people. And my clicker didn't do anything. There we go. All right, so 100 years later, 2 billion. Okay, so it took all of human history to reach 1 billion, and it took 100 years to reach another billion. All right, the third billion was added 30 years later in 1960. 1975 is only 15 years later, and that's when we saw the fourth billion. 1985 added another billion. That's only 10 years. Okay. 1996 is when we hit 6 billion. And so you can see that it's slowed a little bit. And so it's looking a little bit less like exponential growth and a little bit more like linear growth, but like it's still very rapid growth. You see what I'm saying? Like, yeah, we went from 10 to 11 years between billions, but that's 11 years that we added a billion people. Okay, that's very rapid growth. 2011 marked 7 billion. All right. And at this moment, at the end of 2022, we sit at the very brink of 8 billion people. 7.999, right? Like they haven't marked it yet, but it's there. So it hasn't slowed very much. All right. Billions are being added at an alarming rate from a historical perspective. And so all authorities agree that we are going to see like 10 billion in our lifetime. So by like 2050. So that's less than 30 years from now. And like, just consider the direction, the trajectory that this little line is taking. You see what I'm saying? Like, how long can this go on? And so this is like complete craziness compared to what has historically been the case. And it's insane to imagine that this can go on indefinitely. So nothing like this has ever happened before. This has only happened within the last century. And this is the problem that's driving a lot of the other problems in the world. All right. And so overpopulation cannot possibly help but lead to hunger. Okay. Hunger is directly related to this. Nan Unklesby was a PhD food scientist. She died last year. She says that on July 11th, 1987, world population reached 5 billion. From July 11th, 1987 to July 11th, 1988, world population grew another 83 million, an increase greater than the population of Mexico. Okay, so that's 1 year. And that's kind of been every year since, another population of Mexico thrown in. And you may think of Mexico differently than this, but there are a lot of people in Mexico. All right. It's not a desert. Some of it is, but that's not what the country consists of. There are a lot of people in Mexico. She goes on. She says, in those same 366 days, arable land diminished by 8,700 square miles, an area greater than twice the size of Jamaica. The world's farmers are trying to feed almost 90 million more people a year with 24 billion fewer tons of topsoil, an amount equal to the soil on all of Australia's wheatland. So you don't hear about this much. All right. So the land that you can raise crops on this planet diminishes every year. And so this is called desertification. It's where the poorer populations of the world cut down the trees so that they can have fuel to cook or to heat their houses with, or even create farmland. So the soil is held in place by the trees. And when the trees are gone, the soil erodes really quickly. And so the remaining subsoil lacks the nutrients that it needs, and it really can't be farmed very well. And so this is happening all over the world. The other thing that's happening that degrades the soil is that when you continually irrigate a bit of land, salinization happens to the land. And so if you run water over it constantly, the continual evaporation of fresh water over a piece of land leaves trace salts, okay, which eventually will concentrate, and you have salt in the dirt. And that's what happens in the Dead Sea. Okay, it's fresh water that runs into the Dead Sea, and it turns to salt over time. And so we have this mushrooming population, but a decline in arable land. A British guy wrote this about 5 years ago. It says that a perfect storm of food shortages, scarce water, and insufficient energy resources threaten to unleash public unrest, cross-border conflicts, and mass migration as people flee from the worst affected regions. The UK government's chief scientist warns. Our food reserves are at a 50-year low, but by 2030, we need to be producing 50% more food. At the same time, we'll need 50% more energy and 30% more fresh water. So where in the world do you get 30% more water? All right, that's weird. Water is kind of a big deal, and it's kind of a big problem. So lots of countries have been tapping aquifers that had been there for a really long time, okay, but they're running dry. This is happening all over the Near East, okay? And so commercial fishing is a huge source of protein for the world. And you can do your own research, but that's begun to slide in a very, very negative direction. Need for protein increases as population increases. Our ability to provide it is decreasing. Okay, so this is Juliet Elperine from an article in the Washington Post. She says that an international group of ecologists and economists warned that the world will run out of seafood. It's always funny to me how they state these things, okay? So it's a little bit alarmist, but a lot of it's based on real numbers, okay? So we'll run out of seafood if steep declines in marine species continue at current rates. Probably we'll just eat a different kind of fish, all right? But that's what she said. U.S. Department of Commerce said in their 2020 report, okay? So this is like a little bit of a real, this is not an article. Okay, this is the U.S. Department of Commerce. It says of 460 stocks and stock complexes, that's of fish, different kinds of fish, okay, 323, that's 70%, have a known overfishing status, and 251, 55%, have a known overfished status. Of the important stocks most targeted by fishermen, 89% have a known overfishing or overfished status. And so this kind of thing is just going to happen in one area after another. All right. The earth simply cannot sustain 10 or 20 billion people forever. Okay. It can't. So this is a little chart where the right side of it shows that the arable land per person has been steadily decreasing. It was not long ago that we could say that there was plenty of ability to produce food for the number of people that we had. Okay. And now that is still true. There is plenty of ability to produce food for the people that we have. The problem that we have is distribution. Okay. Not production at the moment. How do we get the food from the places that can produce it to the places that need it? And how do we make it so that the people who need it can afford it? All right. So today we're at the tail end of being able to produce sufficient quantities of food to feed the world population. The future will hold both problems of distribution and production. Things are going to get worse. Okay, so this is the Living Planet report that Cambridge does every 2 years. Okay, so this information is from 2020 because that's the last one that the full report is finished for. All right, I pulled up 2022 and it's like an advertisement for the report. It's not the real report. So I encourage you to go to their website, read the summary of the report, puts a pretty optimistic spin on the state of things. It focuses on the resilience of the planet and it details the efforts to change the trajectory of things, but the data is unmistakable. Okay, so the human enterprise currently demands 1.56 times more than the amount that the Earth can regenerate. All right. So there's a certain maximum number of resources in like plant and animal life that the earth can keep up with and regenerate constantly. Does that make sense? And so what we're saying is that we have the people on one earth currently consuming and living on the number of resources that it would take over 1.5 Earths to be able to regenerate and keep up with and stay healthy. Okay, just doesn't sound sustainable for very long. Since 2000, 1.9 million square kilometers, an area the size of Mexico. They like to use Mexico. I don't know what the deal is. All right, an area the size of Mexico of ecologically intact land has been lost. Ecologically intact means free from the pressures of humanity. Okay, and having its full natural biodiversity. And so I don't know where they got that number, but that's a hellacious number. All right, and it actually could be true. And so if you go to the Amazon basin today, hoping to get a look at a real like 3 canopy rainforest, you know, from any place that you can fly into, you will journey for a day and a half just to get to the woods. So for over a day's full drive in every direction, it's just like smoking logs laying on the ground. And you can try to tell the people there that those are like pretty old trees and that they matter to the planet and they probably shouldn't be cutting them down, but they don't care. All right, they're trying to feed their families. And they're in survival mode and they don't care how old the tree is or how much the rest of the planet needs that tree or whatever it is. So this kind of thing is happening all over the world. And, you know, we sit in like air-conditioned houses watching, you know, whatever show we can dream up to watch on our streaming services. And we have more food and water than we could possibly need. And we like to criticize other parts of the world for doing environmentally irresponsible things in order to survive. Okay, but look what we did to our wilderness area when we were hungry and when we needed money for food or for our family. Okay, this is normal that less developed countries would behave this way. Okay, and you certainly can't say that we didn't do the exact same thing. Future projections indicate that by 2050, cropland areas may have to be 10 to 25% larger than in 2005. Arable land is decreasing, remember? Okay, but to feed the number of people that we have, it needs to be increasing. All right, and kind of by a lot. So here's the interesting part of all this for me. All right, I know that's a lot of junk and it's a lot of the same thing over and over again. But the people who are most alarmed by this whole situation are the people who study this kind of thing. The people who are not alarmed are the people who aren't paying any attention or don't understand the situation. Okay? If you don't believe this is real, then you're not going to be alarmed by it. You know, but like for political reasons or for social reasons or whatever, people decide to believe that this is all just liberal propaganda. Okay. But if you actually look at the data, if you crack the book yourself, if you go look and see what's going on, you know, you might see that some of this stuff is on a trajectory that is alarming. And so every one of the people who are authoritative when it comes to the ecosystem and the state of world agriculture are alarmed by this. Okay. They are the ones that see us heading towards a catastrophe. And so the only thing you really need to look at, I think, is the population chart. All right. So this whole thing turning bad is inevitable. Okay. It just can't keep going in the same direction. And so in looking stuff up for this teaching, it appears that like 2022, for lots of reasons, has marked a dramatic turn for the worse for the world in this area. And so according to the World Food Program, as many as 828 million people go to bed hungry every night on the planet right now. Okay. The number of people facing acute food insecurity has soared from 135 million to 345 million since 2019. Okay. A total of 50 million people in 45 countries are teetering on the edge of famine right now. I looked that up 3 days ago. Okay. So it's a lot of people, and this is real, and it's different than it has been in the past. There has always been famine. There's always been people hungry. There's always been places in the world where people didn't have food. Okay. This is different. This is talking about a whole world that doesn't have food. All right. So pollution, and you don't even have the screen. So what, I can say anything I want. I don't have to read it right. All right. So pollution's another one of the reasons that the globe's going to need to come together. Again, this is linked to the population. There's a real need to solve this problem. And these are not local problems. These are global problems. And so if you take a look at population growth, you know, like, okay, we don't have a population growth problem in the United States. So our only population growth is from immigration. Did you know that? All right. None of the Western world's population even grows from biological growth anymore. Okay. It all grows from immigration, but the problems in the developing world more than make up for the fact that our populations aren't growing. And so these are problems of a global nature. They're going to need a global solution. So this is a chart of carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. This is not really politics. Okay. This is measurable and it's provable. It's just an example of the kind of pollution that we're talking about. And one of the things that we're starting to figure out is just how interrelated all this stuff is. And so as we try and decrease our fossil fuel use in the Western world, which we are trying to do, we've turned to biofuels and ethanol. And so a lot of our grain production has been funneled towards that, which has in turn increased the price of grain and decreased its availability to use for food. And so as we try to decrease our carbon footprint, and solve problems like the one that this chart is talking about, we're actually exacerbating the food shortage problem. All right. So we haven't really come up with any solutions to any of these problems that don't make the other problems worse. And so the need for some kind of like extra national solution or global solution to these kinds of problems is real. Okay. It may not be pressing for us at the moment, but it remains real. And we could literally go on and on about this all day. Okay. This is just like a smattering of talking points. But besides the apparent and real need for globalization, there's like a shift going on right now. And so we used to be able to say, who cares about those other people? Okay. People from that nation are barely human. All right. We are the only ones that really matter. Let's just take care of us, right? Our tribe, our nation, our continent, even. Who cares? And that's all dissolving entirely. And I'm not indicating at all that it's bad, that it's dissolving. I'm just saying that it's true, that it's dissolving. Okay. There are multiple factors that are pushing us towards that way of thinking that include the entire human race as us. Okay. Like, I don't know if you're on YouTube, like more and more on YouTube, people are like, hello, citizens of the globe. And you know what I mean? Like weird, like people say things that are like, I don't say that. I don't know what you're talking about. But like people, bumper stickers, like unity, we're all one people, whatever. It's normal now to think of it as a global world, not just our nation. And, you might refer to this as a one world mentality. And so looking out for just my nation makes less and less sense. And people are starting to view this as our world. One of the biggest drivers of this has been the globalized economy. And this is all new. This has all happened in the last 40 years ago, certainly since World War II. Okay. And so I've read this to you before. Henry Wendt is the former president of the Bank of America. And it says the emergence of a full-blown global marketplace in which goods, money, and people flow easily back and forth across national borders around the world comes as a shock. Suddenly, the volume of world trade has reached staggering proportions. The world is integrating at a dizzying pace. National borders grow fuzzier and, in many cases, more irrelevant with each passing day. So, if your economy is based on the entire world and not just closed inside of your country, then how much do your country's borders even matter anymore, right? So this is another source. This is Barnett and Mueller. Says the men who run the global corporations are the first in history with the organization, technology, money, and ideology to make a credible try at managing the world as an integrated economic unit. What they are demanding, in essence, is the right to transcend the nation state and, in the process, transform it. So these huge multinational companies don't even care what country they're in. All right. They basically put a base where the best tax brackets are for them and go from there. They don't have a national loyalty. They've got branches in every country. They just want them all to be profitable. Okay. So the goods, the materials, the capital just flows back and forth all over the place. This guy must have made up his name. All right. Hunter Lovin. But this is a good one. It says it's not clear that anyone, even national governments, could slow globalization if they wanted to. Of the world's 100 largest economic entities, more than half are no longer countries, but companies. For instance, here's one that's familiar to us all. In its fiscal year ending 2020, Walmart's revenues were $523.9 billion, 1.5 times the GDP of South Africa. Holy crap, dude. Like South Africa is a decent sized country. All right. And they don't match this one corporation. All right. And that's South Africa's gross domestic product, not their profitability or their tax base. This is GDP. That's all goods and services combined in the whole country. Okay. So these modern multinational corporations are huge, boggles the mind. And so Joseph Stiglitz is a Nobel Prize winning scientist. He's a world leading authority on this subject. He's been the chief economist of the World Bank and also the US president's chief economist, not this US president. He wrote a book in 2006. And he stresses the need for international frameworks and international courts as necessary for the smooth functioning of the global economy, as federal courts and national laws are for national economies. All of the authorities in the field are writing about this same thing. Okay, there has been this like exponential explosion in international trade. And when World War II came to an end, the average international tariff rate on goods brought in from overseas was 40%. And if you wanted to bring something into the US or some other country, it was your cost plus 40%, just because it wasn't made here, right? 1991, the average international tariff rate was down to 5%, and it's still falling. All right, 2010, it was 2.7. Now, in many cases, it's non-existent, right? Like I order stuff from overseas all the time. Nobody taxes me on anything. So the reason is that countries do not want to be left out of anything financially. This whole idea that we can protect our national economy by insulating is completely gone. Every country on earth is scrambling to get a piece of the globalized economic action because that's where the money's at today. Okay, that's where you have to go. And so the guys who are authorities on what all's going on all see the need for some global rules. Right now, it's a little bit like the Wild West. There's a lot of corruption and bribery and cheating at the international level, and there's no one with the international authority to stop it, which is kind of interesting. Things happen like the corrupt US housing market, where we lent a bunch of money to people that we knew full well couldn't pay it back. And then we brought the entire world economy to a screeching halt when it collapsed. Same thing happened when we had the Asian bank failures a while back. So these kinds of things now lead to worldwide recessions. They're all connected. And so our economies are completely interwoven with the other countries on the planet. And it's to a degree that's never been imaginable at any time in the past. So there's this growing need felt to have some international enforcement and some international protection for the people and for the entities that are risking trillions of dollars on international ventures, right? Like, so be nice, I guess, if there was some money police internationally. So Stiglitz says that globalization means that events in one part of the world have ripple effects elsewhere, as ideas and knowledge, goods and services, and capital and people move more easily across borders. As the countries of the world become more closely integrated, they become more interdependent. Greater interdependence gives rise to a greater need for collective action to solve common problems. So that should actually be pretty self-evident. The more our economies depend on each other, the less we're entitled to just do whatever we want in our little region. Just makes sense. And so we're greatly affecting other nations, and so maybe they should have a say. And so we need to be just as concerned with what they are doing because it affects us. They shouldn't be allowed to do something that just messes up our economy. And so they've got our money. or they owe us money, or we need their stuff, or whatever it is, like whatever the relationship looks like. And so this situation does cry out for regulatory institutions. So human beings have created regulatory institutions for much dumber reasons than what we have here. Stiglitz also says that as the world becomes more globalized, more integrated, there will be more and more areas in which there are opportunities for cooperative action, and in which such collective action is not only desirable, but necessary. In effect, economic globalization has outpaced political globalization. We have a chaotic, uncoordinated system of global governance without global government. So all of the authorities agree, okay, that that's the case. There is clear need for strong international institutions to deal with the challenges posed by economic globalization. Yet today, confidence in existing institutions is weak. So this like global governing body hasn't been created yet. So everybody's money is all tied up with everybody else's money all over the world. And it's all vulnerable to the fact that national governments can't regulate what happens in other countries. So how long do you suppose that the world, is going to put up with the current system? And it's inevitable. Like something bad's going to happen. And then the solution is going to be, here's a group of people that are going to take care of this for us. So David Korten wrote a book. I reference it semi-regularly. It's called When Corporations Rule the World. And he says that the most rapid and sweeping institutional transformation in human history has happened in the last 2 decades. It's quite a statement. I'm sure that it's true. It's a conscious and intentional transformation in search of a new world economic order in which business has no nationality and knows no borders. So do you see how this issue would lend to a movement towards a one world governing solution to the problem, right? Like that's the point of all of this. It most certainly does for the people who know the most about it. Okay, again, the people who know the most about how the world economy works are the ones that are the most clear that we need an international global solution to this problem. And when the people with the most money start to think that a thing is needed badly, how long do you think we're going to be without it? Right? Alvin Toffler, this is another regular guest on my channel. He says that old safety mechanisms designed to maintain financial stability in a world of relatively closed national economies are as obsolete as the Rust Belt world they were designed to protect. So it doesn't do any good at all for us to regulate our own stock market to avoid a crash and a depression if the rest of the world doesn't regulate their own in the same way, right? They have a crash and a depression. It's going to hit us just as hard as if our own did. So everything is integrated now. So there's a second area that leads to this ability to see the world as one rather than separate entities. It has to do with information technology. This is an obvious one. This is the most staggering development that we live with right now, I think. And we pretty much just take it for granted. All right, even now. So think about it. People today can make pretty direct contact with anyone else in the world, and probably with a live picture attached. That has never even been close to true until our day. So because of the internet and the global economy, English is becoming the international trade language. All right. So most of the world's trying to learn English. So internationally, it's a pretty coveted skill to speak English because, that's where the money is. You can get a job in any country if you speak English. Increasingly, you can travel into any strange country only speaking English. Right? People will speak to you in your own language, which is historically pretty weird. All right. Even in like 1999, when I was traveling the world, there were only a couple of countries where it was normal for people to speak English to me. And everywhere else, people were just like, I don't know. But, this last time when Jill and I went to Prague, it was like we ran into lots of people that spoke English. And Prague's like at the Iron Curtain, right? Like that's a weird place. Not today, but historically, that's a weird place for people to be speaking English. Trade, communication, and understanding are growing exponentially. So listen, the internet did not really exist for us to use just like 25 years ago. Okay. People didn't even know about it. All right. I can remember when you would ask people, about something on the World Wide Web. All right. And they wouldn't know what you were talking about. Okay. And so when I went to college, you still had to go to the library to do your research. There was a phone number that you could call with your house phone that had a cord, and a machine would tell you exactly what time it was. Remember that? No one was carrying an atomic clock in their pocket. Okay. So you needed to occasionally check and see if your watch was right. Anyone else remember putting the Mosaic floppy disk in the, right? Or even AOL, right? Waiting for it to spin up, waiting for the dial-up connection. Trying to find the primitive websites in 1992 with no search engine, right? Remember that? Like there was no, remember when Yahoo first was like, oh, wow, look, you can type something in and they'll bring up results. You don't have to know what the address is anymore. All right. So that's what the beginning of the internet looked like. And everything that we see today has happened since then. Like, listen, I know that some of you think 1992 was a long time ago, but it wasn't. All right. Revelations 11. Interesting bit that shows this is one of the technologies that's has to be in place before the last days. So talks about two guys dying. And then it says in verse 9 that for 3.5 days, men from every people, tribe, language, and nation will gaze on their bodies and refuse them burial. So that statement is absolutely insane when nothing like the internet exists. So when this was written, it would have taken several months just to go see something that was on the other side of the Roman Empire. And so when this was written, they didn't even know that most of the world existed, except this is pretty explicit. Okay. Every people, every tribe, every language, right? Like, so it's not just that they hear about it or they read about it, they gaze upon the bodies. This all happens in a 3.5 day period. So how's that possible, right? Like, how it's possible. Of course, how it's possible. We do stuff like this all the time. We never even slow down long enough to consider just how unique this is in the course of human history. So just a couple of years ago, right? Like a guy died on a live stream on Facebook when I shot by a policeman, and a bunch of us watched it. All right. This is a prediction from ancient times predicting that this kind of thing is going to be possible. And this must have been absolutely baffling to an ancient reader. Like, how many times the copyist wanted to change this into something that made sense? You know what I'm saying? Like, I gotta make it so that it's possible for this prediction to be true. And yet it's true. The way that we're able to travel today, right? Like, makes it easier and easier to view the entire world as a single entity, I think. And so it's fast and easy and relatively inexpensive to travel wherever you want, compared to what historical travel has looked like. So probably most of us here have done some kind of international travel. used to be something that only the like tiniest elite could manage to do, international travel. Entertainment and media, also a force in this direction. So you can go into many of the poorest cities on the planet today, and the people there have cell phones, right? With the internet on them. And so they're thoroughly familiar with American entertainment. Doesn't seem to make any difference how the people feel about America as a nation. They still hunger for Western entertainment. And so American TV and movies and music is all over the world. It's also being imitated in the entertainment that's produced inside the various nations. So the dress, the language, all of it. Basically, the younger people in these cultures don't want to follow their own culture. They want to follow Western culture. And so there's this rapid abandonment happening of these traditional ways of life that have existed essentially unchanged for thousands of years. And so within just a few decades, the culture is shifting rapidly towards all looking kind of the same. And so this was not this way just a short time ago. This is really a recent thing. And I think that it contributes to this ability to view the world as one. We also have these institutions coming into existence. These may be the beginnings of the one world government type bodies that we talked about a few minutes ago. I don't know, maybe. We have the International Monetary Fund is the intergovernmental organization that oversees the global financial systems by following the macroeconomic policies of its member countries, in particular, those with an impact on exchange rate and balance of payments. And the World Bank is an international financial institution that provides loans to developing countries for capital programs. And the World Trade Organization is an organization that intends to supervise and liberalize international trade. So the mentality is clearly building, where it's easier and easier to just naturally think of the world as unified, right? And it just was not always like that. All right. This is the first time ever that it's possible and natural for thinking to head in this direction. Okay. And so it isn't just the need for globalization and the mentality in favor of globalization that we have now. We also have this unprecedented ability to make this happen. So remember the passage in Revelation where it said that there would be a number for everyone's forehead and hand, right? That would make it so that they couldn't buy or sell anything. So pretty high control. Everyone on earth would have a specific, like specified identity that would have to be verifiable, right? And that would require a colossal computerized system to keep track of all that. Okay, so like you can't do this with parchment and a scroll. Okay, that's not how this is going to work. It would also require some pretty precise methods for how to control monetary things. Okay, so another thing that Stiglitz points out is that bank secrecy aggravates the problems of corruption, providing a safe haven for ill-gotten gains. In the aftermath of the East Asian crisis, there were calls from the IMF and the US Treasury for greater transparency in the Asian markets. And so this kind of stuff is going to increasingly happen. And so we're going to increasingly think that we cannot allow people to do crazy or stupid things with the money. And so we're going to need a way to keep track of people and money. So this thing here was approved a while back as a way to prevent identity theft and to store patient medical information. So it's very much like the chips that they put in dogs and cats. Identity theft steals billions of dollars every year, and some people really live in fear of it, real or imagined. The perception is that a solution is needed. Okay, this could be a potential solution. With the pinch of a syringe, the microchip is inserted under the skin in a procedure that takes less than 20 minutes and leaves no stitches. Silently and invisibly, the dormant chip stores a code that releases patient-specific information when a scanner passes over it. So here's what it kind of looks like installed. Is this what they're talking about in the Mark of the Beast passage? I don't have the slightest idea what they're talking about in the Mark of the Beast passage, but it could be, right? It fits the tech and it can do what the Bible says that it's going to need to do. All right. So no technology ever has been more likely to be what is being described. Okay. India launches a project to ID 1.2 billion people. So India's vaunted tech savvy is being put to the test as the country embarks on a daunting mission, assigning a unique 12-digit number to each of its 1.2 billion people. The project, which seeks to collect fingerprint and iris scans from all residents and store them in a massive central database of unique IDs, is considered by many specialists the most technologically and logistically complex national identification effort ever attempted. And here's a picture of this going on. And so dude is taking a retinal scan of this little girl with that thing pushed against her forehead. All right, here they're doing it to an old man. So could be interpreted as a mark on the forehead. I don't know. Okay, like I'm stretching what it says. You see what I mean? Like it doesn't say that this is what it's talking about, but before this existed, what we're talking about is somebody with a pen writing a number on your head. Okay. Seems unlikely. I don't know. Could be they're talking about retinal scans and chips in the hands, but this is like India is like the most populous country in the world. They're putting together digital identities for each of their people. Okay. And so we're definitely headed in a certain direction. When infrastructure like this gets built, it makes a lot of things possible, doesn't it? It would, in fact, be a solution to the problem of international terrorism, because, like, you'd know who everybody was that was moving around. And so if the only way to buy anything was with digital transfer from a digitally verified identity, how would you mug somebody? Okay. Or pick their pocket? Right? There'd be no real cash money. There'd be nothing that you could take from anybody. This would be a perceived solution to a lot of problems. A lot of people think that this would be awesome. Okay. Things are headed this way with no real way to stop them, even if you wanted to. I'm not sure we should want to. I don't know. I don't even care one way or another. All right. So last week we went through Israel being back in their country. We've now gone through globalization and what that looks like. And I think that this stuff is pretty much at hand. It's happening as we speak. Not completely there. Okay. I'm not saying that we currently live under a one world, right? But it's possible. It's plausible in a way that has been unimaginable for all of human history until right now. Becomes more plausible every day. But don't misunderstand me. Okay. I am not saying that the end times must come soon. Okay. This could remain possible for another 1,000 years. I have no idea. God is not going to bow to my interpretation of future prophecy. Okay. That's not how this works. But what I am saying is that it's possible for all of this stuff to start in the very near future. All right. It's pretty much possible to be at hand. That's not something that you could say before without stretching the plain meaning of some of what it says. Okay. So the conditions that lead to the end times are there. Technology. And so some of the things that are predicted in the Bible, like having a number on each person and everyone on earth watching the same event in the same few days, this has really only been in place since the 90s. Okay. Before that, there was no real way to make sense of these passages. It's in place now. Now these passages are so easy to interpret that it seems weird that they weren't always possible. Okay. And so we're going to touch on that one again some more next week. But I think that this is pretty much in place. We got the technologies to accomplish what's being described. Didn't touch nuclear technology, but maybe you can sense that Jesus is implying some of that in his statements. The stressing factors that will force people to consider new ways of doing things and to accept solutions that they would never accept otherwise. I'm not sure these are complete. Okay. But there's like a faded check mark. All right. They're building and we can see that they're close. And so as we approach 9 billion people on this planet, the stress is going to increase in a dramatic way, I think. The other two, the last two, we're going to do next week. So draw a couple of conclusions from what we looked at this morning. None of these things that we're talking about seemed at all likely 2,000 years ago when Jesus was talking about this. So some of these things that we went over today, right? Some of the stuff that we brought up was written 3,000 years ago. All right. It's old, but people couldn't imagine any of this stuff. But they wrote it down anyway because Jesus or God said it, and they didn't try and make it believable. We have it, right? Israel disappearing as a nation and coming back, not likely. People all over the world watching the same thing at the same time, not likely. All right, so check this stuff out. The stuff was written 2,000 years ago, and we're saying how unlikely and unimaginable it was then. Okay, but even 200 years ago, okay, and I know that that sounds like a long time too. Like it's not. Okay, all of this stuff was just as improbable 200 years ago as it was 2,000 years ago. I mean, equally implausible. Okay, equally difficult to imagine how any of this stuff would take place. Okay, that's like 1820 we're talking about. People are still riding horses. Okay, if you wanted to go to China, you get on a sailboat. Okay, you might make it there and you might not, but if you do, it's going to take you 2 or 3 months to get there 200 years ago. If you want to communicate with someone in China, you had to write a letter on paper and hope that it got there in like 5 months. When it did get there, they would have to find someone to translate it because it's in the wrong language and no one there speak, right? Like they don't speak English in China. And so, in fact, as recently as 50 years ago, almost none of the things on this list were present. Israel was a nation, but they didn't have Jerusalem. All right. That's what Jesus said was key. We had some nuclear weapons, but we could not have figured out how to destroy all the life on the planet with the ones that we had. So these pieces are falling into place in the last few decades. All right. None of this would have seemed at all plausible until pretty recently. And that's really the point that I want to make. All right. God said this stuff was going to happen. And when God says in the Bible that something is going to happen, it happens. It happens like he says it's going to happen. It's not Nostradamus where we're stretching an event to make it fit into what God said. See what I mean? So this is a miraculous fulfillment of prophecy already. And the prophecies aren't even fulfilled yet. All right. But it's very clear that Jesus understood what was going to be possible in the future and what the future looked like. Okay. God said this stuff would happen. He also said that Jesus was going to come back. And so that's what this whole discussion started out with. The question was, what was the sign of your coming and the end of the age to Jesus? And so that's what Jesus has been explaining here. Predictive prophecy is not given to us to satisfy our curiosity. Okay, it's not some sort of parlor trick. It's supposed to alert us to the key moments and the key movements of God in history, and specifically to alert us to Jesus Christ. When it all comes down to it, it's all about Jesus. It's all about the Christ. And so at the climax of this drama, like who comes in and rescues the human race? It's Jesus, just like it was last time. In fact, we get to the end of the chapter and this whole Olivet discourse, right? Like the punchline comes and it's, so you need to be ready for the coming of the Son of Man. So this whole discussion is about being ready. To be ready for the coming of Christ is to have a real spiritual, personal transaction between each one of us and God. So rescue for us is not going to come from some institution that man creates. It's not going to be from someone passing the right laws that protect our money. It's going to be a matter of like getting that personal relationship with God going. And that comes only and strictly by the gift of the free grace of God, right? Recognizing that we don't deserve salvation and knowing that the only way we're going to get to have a relationship with God is because Jesus paid the price that our sin was causing us to have to pay. And so the only way that you're going to be on the winning side of the end times Armageddon thing that we haven't really talked about yet is by accepting the rescue that God has planned for you. All right. He promises he's going to do that if you come to him and ask for it. So we're going to look at some more next week too. We'll finish the Olivet discourse. What does it mean to be ready? Okay, is what we're talking about. What the coming of the Son of Man is going to happen someday, and we're supposed to be ready for it. And so there's a lot to consider. That's all we're going to do this morning.